Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Welcome to another 2023 Project Orchids video. This is video number 5, the final video for Orchid number 4, which was our Paphiopedilum Black Jack. And this one's got quite a nice story to it. It's a sort of store-bought plant, even though it came from Burnham's, but nonetheless it was not one grown at Burnham's, it was one bought in to sell. So it comes into a similar category to the those type of oncidiums and the phalaenopsis and things like that. Just caught my eye. And it's got the full story. We started off with a new plant. We've repotted it, we've done some progress reports, and we get to video number 5 where we've got something a little bit different and a bit special. So let's get going. Now this is Paphiopedilum Black Jack. It was bought in bloom and hasn't done anything since. So let's have a good look at the plant itself. This is the growth that bloomed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a bit leaves. I don't count that as a leaf because it's the leaf that surrounded the flower spike. So that bloomed with 5 leaves. So let's have a look at the rest of the plant then. We've got a growth here that's got a well, I hadn't noticed that until I picked it up. It's got a new growth coming. Right, so that probably confirms that the one it's growing off of is not going to bloom. However, it's growing off of an older growth that is not the one that's bloomed. It looks like a new growth, but I'm not sure it is. We'll wait and see. But this growth here has got a silly little leaf and 3 full-size leaves, but it is growing another one, which would give it 4. So whether that's enough to produce a spike or not, I don't know. And then the other little one over here, that's got a little leaf again, 2, 3, 4, and is also growing a new leaf. So we've got 3 growths in total, one of which has got the most leaves on and has bloomed. It's got 2 other growths that appear to be growing because they do have new leaves coming out. Whether that new leaf on either of those 2 would bring it up to sufficient size and strength to produce a spike or not, we'll have to wait and see. Now, these speckly ones are traditionally treated as warmer growers than their green-leaved cousins. That's not across the board, but it's a pretty good generalisation. Now, the problem with that is that obviously I don't necessarily have the temperatures for this to do well. But what I won't get is the extremes of heat that I used to get in the other place, which I think actually pulled the ones that I did have down. They never grew that well in the other place. So they don't like extremes of light, they like gentle light. And basically, if their roots get soggy, they will rot. It's a matter of getting to know your plant. But I don't want to get to know my plant, I want to see what's going on. So first of all, let's see if we can lift this out without making a mess all over my black cloth. Chances are the media is going to fall all over the place and it won't be connected to the root system. Okay, so what we've got is a lousy root system in soggy media. So I'll gently put that back on top. Give it a shake so that it loosens up, and that will allow a drying process to start, and that will now get a repot. Now that's going to be filmed obviously because it's a project plant, but the video of me repotting that, the repotting can't wait 2 months until this is due to be filmed again. That can't happen. So I shall probably get on and repot this in the next day or 2. And we'll just have to hope that it can generate some roots, because the roots on it are not very good at all, and there aren't many. So it's not in a good state below ground. what we can hopefully do is recover that by getting it in some more suitable media that doesn't stay soaking wet like this does. We lifted it out of the pot in video number 1, and it was decided that it was soaking wet, the roots didn't look too good, and it needed a repot. So that's what we're going to do now. It will lift out of the pot with no effort at all. We'll keep the tag, and I'll leave the old media in the pot on the grounds it makes less mess. I'm just going to knock off the old media. I'm not going to go mad here, because believe it or not, although this is a bit soggy, the roots aren't. So it was the media that was the problem, and in the not too distant future the roots would have been the next problem on the list. But I think this has been caught good enough. So if you look at the root system, these are firm. There's no soggy roots here, they're all actually firm. There's none actively growing. I'm hoping to put that right now. So there's no cleanup to do on this, there's no cutting of roots. I'm not going to separate any of the growths, they're all attached, all 3 of them, and we'll see how we get on. I'm relatively confident, if that's in focus, that that is a new growth. If that's a new growth, it's highly unlikely this one will bloom. Whether the other one will, round this side, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, we've got some roots. Let's get going. Now I've got a pot that is around the same size, but it is slightly deeper. That will allow me to put the plant a bit deeper in the pot, yeah, so that it'll support itself. That's my theory, is that it will be self-supporting. So I was just looking at that white stuff on the underside, but it's at some point in its life it's been sprayed with something, I think, and there's some residual on some of the leaves, which I'm not going to worry about. Right, so we need a mix. Now first off, I've looked up what lots of different people think is a good media for Paphiopedilums, and they all give general advice. What they don't do is be specific, because not all Paphiopedilums are created equal, but they keep getting treated equal, which annoys me. You know, that's like saying a dendrobium that grows in the top of the trees is the same as one that grows on the moss in the rocks. It's not. And Paphiopedilums can come from quite different environments, including the forest floor, rocky environments, places where there's water runoff, you know, sort of on rocky outcrops where water runs past. These are different environments, and in my book require probably different media. So you can't generalise like that. However, I've got a hybrid, so I haven't got a flipping clue what sort of environment it wants. The reason for getting some moss out is one of the reasons I've gone back to moss for specific reasons. And one of those specific reasons is root generation and root regrowth and stimulating roots. And this type of New Zealand moss is very good at doing that. Doesn't really matter even what type of orchid it is, it just seems to be very good at getting roots going again on plants that have, you know, gone downhill and have lost or partially lost their root system. Now this one hasn't lost its root system, but I'd like to generate some new ones. Paphiopedilum roots don't branch very often, that's not a natural occurrence, but they can shoot out and they can regrow. So where there is no growing tip, one can start again. I didn't get that out of a book. When I used to grow them, I've seen that for myself. So no substitute for the real thing, as they say. Right, I've broken that up. That's not going in the whole pot. That's going near the top of the pot where the roots are. The bottom of the pot, no. But we don't use that stuff dry. That stuff we do actually give a bit of a soak, get it going, sort of thing. It's initially when it's dry like this, it absorbs a lot of water from this totally dry state. So if you put it in the pot in that totally dry state, it will take all the water out of the surrounding media, leaving that almost bone dry. Okay, the moss will have some moisture, but the rest of the media won't. So we give that a bit of a soak. Get that going. Right, what else are we going to do? We're going to dry my hands off, otherwise it's why I tend to try and use dry media, because wet media sticks to everything, including sides of pots, roots, and doesn't get down into all the crevices. So let me just get the moss out of the way. We won't know, it's only a small amount. Now this in here is a mix I made up a while ago. There's nothing wrong with it. It's basically small bark and some perlite. Well, this was mixed up for another reason. So this is basically the media I want to use, and that's more than enough. But what I am going to do is add a little more perlite, if I can get into this tub, which is sometimes reluctant to let go of the lid. I just want to be a bit heavy on the perlite. I was looking at some pictures of, you know, people that have decided that this is a good media for Paphiopedilums. Perlite is often involved. Small fir bark is the mainstay, but some of the mixes did look a bit heavy on the perlite, so I'm going to, I've added a bit more in, follow the trend, especially when some of the information has come from specialist growers. Those are the people that you go to. I mean, there is a Paphiopedilum specialist nursery in this country. I've never been to it. I think it's up north somewhere, which is probably why. So their information is probably pretty good stuff. Now I'm putting some in without the moss to cover the air cone, and then I'm going to see what this is going to look like. Well, all the roots will go in, and that can go down so that it rests on the side of the pot. That's quite deep. That's good. So I'm going to mix the moss in with what's left, and that will go around the roots. Now what I always do with moss, not everybody does, is I give it a squeeze to get the worst of the water out. It just mixes in better like that. So we will add our moss. I bet a lot of people are thinking, I didn't think I would ever see that New Zealand sphagnum moss on a Rogers Orchids repotting video ever again. Well, it has its purposes. Now I did substitute the moss for the cocoa husk for a while, cocoa chunks, but it did some good in some places, but overall I'm not as happy as I at first was. I think it's good stuff, but I think it needs reasonable temperatures so that it doesn't stay wet too long, which is what was happening with me basically. And with my cool temperatures, that basically was a no-no. It was just staying wet far too long. Yeah, it's amazing how many different mixes I came up with this morning, but basically the main ingredients that averaged across all of the different places that I looked was fir bark and perlite. Some added moss in, some added charcoal, some added moss and charcoal. So it was a right old mix basically, but the main thing is to remember that a lot of places you read about Paphiopedilums will call them terrestrials across the board, and that's not true, because some of them are basically, you would have to class them as lithophytes. In other words, they grow on rocks. And the ones that grow on the forest floor, yes, I would say that's terrestrial. although they're growing in the leaf litter, not in the actual soil. In the main, not across the board again, and I've seen film of a type of Paphiopedilum that is deemed to be a shade lover, and it was growing on an island, one of those islands you see in the tropics, the Far East, that basically stick out of the water. Just a column of rock sticking out of the water with green bits on. And this was filmed from quite a way off. And this face of this rock and this greenery had like white shadows on it that you couldn't work out what it was. And gradually, as they moved closer in the boat and closer, this rock face was covered in Paphiopedilum delenatii. Yeah? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in bloom, in full sun, getting splashed with seawater. And doing very nicely. Now, if you put that in a book and said that's how you should grow that particular Paphiopedilum, people would get you taken off to the funny farm. But that's where they were growing, and they were doing very well indeed. And you know, this goes to show sometimes that you know, the plants can make exceptions to the rules. Well, if they can, so can we. Okay, so I'm just up to around the level of the base. Certainly not burying the base of the plant, just up to the base. Now my new growth here is going to have room to grow, because it's strange, although the leaves are quite strappy and spread out, the actual base of the growth is quite narrow. So there's plenty of room for this new growth. It will be quite tight to the edge of the pot, but there's room for it. Right, so we will give that a good soak now, and then we will not water it again until it is quite dry. The only thing I want, because of its potential terrestrial nature, is we want one of these. Yeah? It's better to keep the light out, and that's a perfect size for this one, because it leaves the rim sticking out, which means when I want to water it I can take it out. But it'll keep the light off, and I've got a lot more pots that I need to do that to stop the algae growth, because we're getting into the longer days and everything now. So we'll put our tag back in. We'll put it somewhere about there, and we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that we will initiate some root growth. Now, again, the ancient scrolls will say that the mottled leaf types tend to be warmer growers than the plain ones. But again, that's not across the board. There are variables going both ways. But my temperatures, my daytime temperatures in here are getting artificially increased now. I'm up to 20 at the moment, so I'm forcing 20 degrees on the plants for most of the day length, which is considerably more than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was at 19 degrees. So we're getting there. Right, so that's that one. Anyway, let's have a look at what we've got now. As far as growths are concerned, this growth here, this one, is unflowered and appears to be continuing to grow. The new growth is this one down the side, which is also continuing to grow. So we have two actively growing fans on this. And if you come round here, this one I believe is growing as well. So we may have 3 actively growing fans on here, which could mean we might get multiple spikes down the line. Chances of them all coming together are pretty slim, I'd have thought. But following the repot, I'm sure the thing you're most interested in is what's going on in the pot. Well, let's have a look if it will come out one-handed. Yes, it will. Right, first of all, underneath that new fan I can see new roots. You can see a root tip there at the top of the pot. And in the pot we've got active root growth. 2 lovely root tips there, another one there. So it is generating a new root system quite actively. Those are the root tips in the pot. As I said, there's also a couple at the very base of that new fan that haven't gone down into the pot yet. And there's another root tip there, right on the end of my thumb. We have actively growing roots, so I think this repot has been successful and this plant will now grow on quite nicely. That's my theory. So yeah, I don't know how long it'll be before it spikes again. These are notoriously slow growers, but they do an awful lot better with a good root system underneath them. So with new media this year and actively growing roots, it should be okay. So all I can hope for this over the next 2 months is to continue to grow. The fans that are growing continue to do so. The root tips just keep going, you know, and actually form a decent root system. And we'll look again in 2 months' time. This is progress. I must admit, I have had Paphiopedilums in the past and I haven't had one grow this well or this quickly. I'm pleased. If you look here, this is the actual growth that was in bloom when I bought it. The darker leaves are the older part of the plant. Some damage on some of those leaves, but that was prior to me getting it. And then we come around this side of the plant and this is all the new growth. Now this growth here I didn't expect to bloom because it looked like an older one, but we've got a bud that will be open relatively soon. And then down in front of it is the new growth. This is the one that started since I had it and it's pushing on, you know, quite nicely. But next to it is another older growth and that's got a bud in it as well. So we've got 2 buds on the go at the same time, and I think, given that it lasts quite a long time, they may well both be out at the same time. Now that'll be a novelty for me, 2 growths actually in bloom at the same time. So it's progressing well. I'm very pleased. It seems to be happy, and last time we looked at it we had the start of some reasonable roots coming on. Prepare to be impressed. That's a hell of a root system. I've never had a Paphiopedilum with a root system anywhere near as good as that. It's still growing, it's still pushing on and coming out the bottom of the pot. So we have ample roots to support that plant. And I intend to maintain those roots by making sure this media never gets a chance to go stale. It has got sphagnum moss mixed in with it, as you'll see if you want to go back and watch the repot video too. You'll see the mix I used. So basically, progress on this one I would suggest is very good. A bud about to open, a second bud starting, and a third new growth pushing on down the front of the plant. So yeah, there's effectively 3 growths on the go at the same time on this plant. So I'm well pleased with that. Okay, so video number 5, the final. So this is the last time we look at this as part of the project Orchids, and I think you'll probably agree this one's done pretty good. When we last looked at this in video number 4, we had a spike with a bud on, and we had another bud just starting to show. And since then, I think we've had a bit of progress, shall we say. We've got a nice looking plant. The new leaves on here are nice and shiny. The other new growth that hasn't bloomed is pushing on nicely. Yeah, it's getting its third leaf. That probably will be followed by a spike, a bud, and some more blooms. But what we've got here is a little unusual for Blackjack. And that is the spike split into 2, and we ended up with 2 blooms per spike. Now we've still got 1 to open, but that's the first one to open. The second one, which has got a couple of aphids on, that's off that flipping Shari baby. Not an outbreak, an odd one or two like that. I just squash them with my fingers. I don't go mad. You spray the whole plant for 3 aphids. Anyway, so we had our first bloom opened. We then had our second bloom opened. We then had our first bloom open on the second spike, and a second bud on that spike as well, which has yet to open. So this is going to be in bloom quite a long time, because obviously this spike was behind timing wise this one actually opening. So I'd say if this is as well as I can do with Paphiopedilums, and the other Paphiopedilums I've got don't do quite as well, I think they're still going to do quite well, if you see what I mean, as opposed to in the other place where they didn't do well at all. So I'm well pleased with this, really well pleased. And there's something a bit special. Well, it went to a show and came back with one of those. Yay! So yes, well pleased. Look, that's actually got wet there, and the colours run off the printer ink. Right, better keep that dry then. Yes, so yeah, it did well at a show, and it looks good in the collection, and let's hope the other Paphiopedilums pull on as well as this one. We can only hope, and yeah, I live in hope. That's how you work with orchids. You don't get much choice, but you know. Anyway, this was a good one. Okay, so I think you'll probably agree this is one of the better orchids in the collection, and as a consequence has prompted me to get some more Paphiopedilums. I doubt if any will do as well as this one, but we can always hope. See you again next time. Bye for now.